Hello, fearless changemakers. When's the last time you stepped forward with courage, with excitement and passion for making your world and the world around you a better place? In this podcast, we touch on all those things, stepping forward into advocacy, releasing the shackles from their throats, and speaking openly, courageously, getting into the heart of the issues that matter for them to drive positive change and move forward for a better life, not only for them, but for you, for me, and for the generations that follow. Welcome, John Barlow, MP of the Foothills riding. And first, it's been like a struggle to try and get you on here, but I'm glad we got you on. And I'm so thankful that you can take the time to be able to just help talk a little bit more about that political realm of advocacy. And maybe we should bring it back to Civics 101 a little bit. So let's first just introduce yourself, John Barlow, and let us get a sense of who you are from journalist to politician.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And I really appreciate you having me on and certainly your patience and getting this scheduled. Everybody thinks, you're home for the summer, you got a summer break, but it doesn't really work that way. We're very busy traveling throughout the riding and meeting with constituents, which is great. It's one of my favorite parts of the job for sure. Yeah, I was a journalist for almost 25 years, mainly throughout here in southern Alberta. High River and Okotoks was the vast part of my career. But I thought that was, getting into politics was never the end game or never a life goal by any means. But, I certainly had an opportunity to cover a lot of local politics over a couple of decades. And in hindsight, I think it was a great foundation for this job in that, I've been telling people stories in this part of the province for 20 years. I knew how to ask questions, do research. I think people trusted me. So when this opportunity arose, I just had a huge number of people coming and asking me if I would do this. And people who I trusted and I looked up to were saying, we think this is something that you'd be really good at. Initially, I said no. I didn't want to spend that much time away from home. I still had one of my youngest daughter who was still in high school. But my wife, Louise, who's way smarter than me, she said, if you don't do this now, you never know when this chance will come again. And I know you'll regret it for the rest of your life. And she was right. This has been an incredible experience. And representing the people of Foothills in southern Alberta is just one of the greatest opportunities I could ever have in my lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, it opens up so many doors too, even just in the connections that you get to make along the way. And really getting outside of that little bubble that even in journalism you can get stuck in. And now you get to hear, like you said, the stories of all these other people as well, because people are now reaching out to you rather than waiting for the journalists to find them.
Yeah, certainly, I knew a lot about hyper local issues as a journalist here, but this has definitely been an eye-opening learning experience as I now have to take things on a much more global scale, not only provincially, but nationally and internationally. So that has definitely been a steep learning curve. But you're right, Lisa. I think one of the benefits of this is I've had the opportunity to work with incredible people, meet amazing people right across this country, and interact with folks here in southern Alberta that I would have never had the opportunity had I not been for this job, and built some really strong friendships and working relationships that I will cherish forever.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the Foothills riding, it's huge in contrast to, say, a riding in central Ontario. So let's talk about that. What kind of challenges does that size of riding provide for you?
I don't complain about it too often because, I think of my colleagues in Northern Ontario and Northern Alberta, Saskatchewan. Theirs are way bigger than mine. Mine's about 30,000 square kilometers. Some of them are more than 100 square kilometers. So I find it pretty tough for me to complain about my getting around. But I'd say that the challenge with my riding, or not challenge, I guess, but what makes it unique is not the size of it, but the diversity in it, where I have, the central part of my riding is very agricultural based, High River, Nanton, Claresholm. The very southern part of my riding, Ness Pass, Pincher Creek, much more, mining and other resources. But then I have the very northern part of my riding, which is Elbow Valley, Springbank, which is a totally different group of people that don't really necessarily have stuff in common with the rest. And then in all that, I've got Tsuut'ina First Nation, Eden Valley, Pekani, which has different issues. So it's not a challenge, but it's a bit different, and I like that in that I always have something different every day, and that's the challenge, I guess, would be if what one area of the riding wants doesn't necessarily mesh with another, and you kind of have to put that together somehow that you work for the majority.
Yeah, well, that's a fair point, because in the end, you have to find that common ground for everybody, because you are then representing all of them as a whole when you go into into Parliament in the House of Commons. Yeah. So
yeah,
go ahead.
That's why we try to be as approachable and accessible as possible, that people know that they can reach out to us. We try to hold town halls and meet and greets throughout the riding. So we want to make sure we have the pulse of what's going on in Foothills, so that when these big issues do arise, that the people know that we'll be responsive and we can reach out to folks as quickly as we can.
Yeah, perfect. And then, so we have tons of newcomers, and we have a lot of, I guess, really and truly, we've either forgotten what we learned decades ago, or we really don't understand anymore, because civics has basically been taken out of the school system. So what does a member of Parliament do? Wow,
that's a good question. It's, to make it overly simplified, it's really two different roles. And I would say why I say that is that there's the role that you have when you're here home in the riding, and then there's the role you have when you're in Ottawa. When I'm here in the riding, it's really about community outreach. It's about connecting with constituents, listening to their feedback and their insights, trying to address their concerns. In the office here, we really focus on issues with the government, like that could be a tax issue with the Canadian Revenue Agency, immigration issues with your permanent residency card or passports. Mm-hmm. That's what we do here. When I'm in Ottawa, it's much more of a national scale. Certainly dealing with legislation, government policy, committee work, international trade relations. So it's really two different hats. When I'm at home, very hyper-local, very focused here on the riding. When I'm on Ottawa, even though I'm speaking for Foothills, it often has a much more global focus, if that makes some sense. Yeah. So I want to clarify, when you say global, are you actually meaning national, or you're meaning how the nation is interacting with the global world concept? It's both. It's
okay.
Both. Okay. Yeah. Certainly my role focused in agriculture, international trade and supply chain and all those things have a pretty prominent role in our daily business for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Just getting our agricultural goods across the border alone, and then across the oceans to the other locations too, provides enough of a challenge. And then I guess really and truly, as Shadow Minister of Agriculture, Agri-Food, Food Security, that's a huge envelope of items to be tackling. Yes, they all fall under the production of, but you're covering from the dairy farms on the eastern side to the fruit and wineries, or fruit orchards, wineries on the western side. And how do you get all of that combined into how you represent in the House of Commons, or even national or globally?
Yeah, it's definitely a learning experience. I have learned more about different commodities and different farms than I could have ever imagined. Certainly things are done differently, and different products are grown in different parts of the country. But again, that makes it that much more interesting, because you're always learning something. But yeah, it's not often that all of the different commodity groups sing from the same songbook, we'll say. Yeah. So you're trying to find some common ground on big issues that we can get all of these different farm groups and commodity groups to agree on. Mm-hmm. And those are the things that we try to move forward. Yeah, it is different in terms of what may be an issue. Certainly right now with the fruits in BC, with the early frost, they've been devastated this year. But here in central Western Canada, it looks like we're going to have an unreal crop, and much the same in Ontario with corn and soybeans. So yeah, you're learning all the time, and you try to weave some of these policies and legislation that are going to work for everyone. But certainly our biggest role right now is that Canada produces what the world needs, and that is sustainable, affordable, quantity of agri-food and agricultural products. Yeah. And we must ensure that Canadian agriculture can reach its full potential while being environmentally sustainable and economically viable. Yeah. The world needs us, and we can be there for it if in many cases, the government just gets out of the way.
Yeah, 100%. And then I'll add it's also ethically produced as well. And that's massive when it comes to making your buying decisions.
That's for sure. And, there's lots of, misperceptions about what agriculture is. And I really have to stress to people when I talk to them across Canada, because most of the world knows it. And unfortunately, a lot of Canadians don't realize it, that Canadian agriculture, modern Canadian agriculture, is more sustainable than just about any other country in the world because of the technology, the innovation that we've embraced. Precision agriculture, for our nutrient stewardship, zero-till, crop rotation, gene editing, all of these things have allowed us to increase our yields, but at the same time reduce our emissions by more than 50%, improve soil health. We just do it better than anyone else. And consumers in Canada, in many cases, don't realize that. And we really need to re-educate consumers about what modern Canadian agriculture is, how we do it, why we do it, and the fact that we do it better than just about anyone else.
Yeah, hear, hear. Growing up in the farming/ranching community, I 100% understand what you're saying because, you get to see all of it. And then I grew up with, it was grocery store parents. So then we bridged. We were the one helping get all of that out. I mean, albeit it wasn't at that time farm to table, but we still understood the importance of those relationships and those connections. And I'm so old, the Alberta wheat pool was still around too. So, I mean, there's all of those childhood memories, right? But it's massive being able to get that education out there. So is there any way that the government or your department is seeking ways to better educate Canadians on those concepts?
Yeah, that's a huge part of what we're trying to take on. And Lisa, you grew up I grew up in rural Saskatchewan, but, we were either on the farm or connected to the farm, or we'd spent time at grandpa's farm or whatever. But nowadays we are generations away from everyday Canadians having any influence or any connection to farming. So we really have to focus on educating Canadians about Canadian agriculture. And there are programs like Agriculture in the Classroom. 4-H is a great example. They aren't just focused on rural communities. They have urban programs as well. Those are the types of things that we need to be doing to show Canadians what agriculture is. But I think there's two things that we need to do. We need to put more push or emphasis or encouragement on the farmers and the agriculture groups themselves to get out there and tell their story. And we're seeing a lot of them do it on social media now, and that's great. But we also need them to start talking outside their own bubble. We are really good at talking to ourselves about how great we are, but we need to get out there and show other people. So that's a different method, but they're doing documentaries and short films, and farmers are just filming what they're doing, showing Canadians, firsthand what a farm is all about. But the government has a role here too. And I'll give you one example. There's still a lot of misperception out there about the safety of glyphosate, for example, one of the most important crop protection tools that we have. And if we were to lose it, it would be devastating to agriculture, not only in Canada, but around the world. Health Canada did its regular review of glyphosate a few years ago, came out, it's completely safe. All the misperceptions and the social media stuff out there is completely not true. But all they did was put out a little press release and say they should have done a massive marketing campaign in partnership with farmers and commodity groups and consumers, showing that glyphosate is completely safe. This is why it's important. This is why we use it. There's no alternatives. And that is a role the federal government could have played. Yeah. The other part that the federal government is doing right now is when you put on a carbon tax, when you put on fertilizer reductions, pesticide reductions, plastics ban, all of these things put a very negative connotation on agriculture. Yeah. So your average consumer out there is saying, well, if the federal government doesn't seem to trust farmers, then maybe there's a problem. The federal government should be a champion for Canadian agriculture, not an adversary. And that is a stark contrast that needs to change.
Yeah, I agree there. And especially in essence, from a bystander viewpoint, the hampering, just the capital gains inclusion rate alone, hampering that succession plan for farmers to continue in the family business. I mean, we've seen, I don't even know the numbers, but a staggering decline in family farms in the last decade. And that is one reason why, is because you are, in essence, becoming further broke every time you pass on that family farm or ranch.
Well, I don't think too many people realize that, as you're saying, that, grandma and grandpa or mom and dad or aunt and uncle, they don't give the farm to the next generation. That next generation buys it off mom and dad or off grandma and grandpa. So the farm, unlike many businesses, when you have that succession planning, and that land and that equipment has been bought and sold multiple times. Mm-hmm. So that next generation is taking on not assets, but millions of dollars in debt.
Yeah.
So the capital gains inclusion rate change makes that succession planning that much more difficult and that much more expensive. So for that younger generation, they have to see that being a farmer is a realistic career opportunity.
Yeah.
And ironically, the Liberals and the NDP will say, well, we don't want to have industrial farms. We need to get away from that. They don't really understand what farming actually is. But all of these policies that they're putting in there, like the capital gains inclusion rate change, is doing exactly what they profess they don't want to happen. You are losing family farms. That means large multinational corporations are going to be the only ones who can afford it. They're going to step in, and they're going to be taking over all of these family farms, which we're seeing. We're losing hundreds of family farms every single year right across Canada. As a result of that, you have mass industrial corporate farms that aren't focused on quality. They aren't focused on sustainability. They aren't focused on soil health. They're focused on numbers. And so everything that the current Liberal NDP government professes that they don't want, all of their policies are pushing us in that direction, losing the family farm and that connection to rural Canada and bringing in these big multinationals.
Yeah. And that's scary too, because it becomes a land loss. Your land stewardship gets lost. And I mean, we're also witnessing it with solar projects that are coming in, buying up land that is deemed brown land, yet it can actually be regenerated, and turning into solar projects that, in the end, to be able to recover that land to then turn it back into farming becomes another challenge. And I mean, solar's great, but as someone who remembers seeing wide open prairie fields, it's really hard seeing the solar project in place of that, with the knowledge that within 15, 20 years, it will likely be decommissioned.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that issue. And I took a lot of flack in Ottawa on this, actually, is I really pushed for the provincial government in Alberta to put a pause on these renewable projects. We were getting a call at least once a week from, solar companies or wind projects wanting to set up in southern Alberta. And when Premier Smith, to her credit, put the pause on to reassess these projects, the Liberals were just ripping me in Ottawa, saying, I don't support, green technology and renewable resources. That's just not true. Yeah. The fact is, in my riding alone, I have more wind turbines than anywhere else in the country. So to say that we don't accept it in Alberta is just categorically wrong. Mm-hmm. But what they didn't understand is, I think the number is between 80 and 90% of the renewable projects approved in Canada were approved in Alberta, because we have an unregulated system. We welcome all comers. But 75% of those were in my riding and Martin Shields' riding, which is directly east of me. Yeah. Hard to guess the numbers, but the numbers were showing that about somewhere between 25 and 40% of the agricultural land in our two ridings was being identified for renewable projects, solar projects or wind turbines. Mm-hmm. We simply can't afford to lose that agricultural land. No. Again, Canada is one of only 5 countries that produces enough agricultural product that we can export and help feed the world. That number is dwindling. Canada is one of those countries that, again, the world is going to rely on. But if we lose that agricultural land to these solar and wind projects, it doesn't come back. And that's my biggest argument, is that they somehow think that you can still farm this land. That is just not true. The secondary part of that is, I just don't trust these companies that 20 years from now, they are going to reclaim this land. They are going to walk away and leave us with a bigger mess than we've ever had from orphan wells. So this was really two things. I think solar and wind have roles. There's places for them to be, but on arable quality agriculture land is not where they need to be.
No.
They're going there because it's cheap. They get an agricultural land tax rather than commercial and industrial. They are taking advantage in many cases of these farmers, and that just isn't right. And we needed to put a framework around this to redirect these projects elsewhere where they could, in commercial or industrial lands like we have in Aldersyde, that works great. But on arable agriculture land, and we have to, this isn't just about crops as well. They say, oh, this is just, class 3 or 4 soil. Yes, but that's grazing land. Very critical for carbon capture and storage of rough fescue grazing land. We can't lose that either. Yeah. I took a bit of a kicking in Ottawa from our opponents, but they just didn't understand what was going on. And people in Alberta, they do understand what's going on.
100%.
We have to protect that agriculture land.
Yeah, 100%. So what's the threat of the moratorium being lifted?
Well, I'm not sure if we'll see what the framework looks like. The moratorium is now lifted, but I haven't seen the same influx of applications as we were seeing before. So I'm hopeful that this new framework will ensure that, there now is protection for class 2 and 3 soil. They cannot be built on that. I'd like to see that go further. Even class 4 soil is grazing land, but maybe that's a little bit too uneven for those solar projects to go on. They want the nice flat land. So I am happy to see that the provincial government did take some steps to protect that ag land. That was critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And from the lowly, public peasant viewpoint, most of us are like, why can't it just go on to rooftops and onto sides of buildings? Why are we not creating those programs instead? Because they're infrastructure where the land is already destroyed. Let's use other surfaces instead of land that could, as you mentioned, be used for grazing or be regenerated into crop again. Yeah,
I think that's exactly what they're planning to do is redirect these projects onto provincial and federal buildings, onto unusable land on the outskirts of cities where for example, in the cloverleafs of overpasses, you've got land that's just sitting there. That could be wind turbines or solar areas. So I believe that's exactly what they're hoping to do is access what's been unusable land up to this point, or those rooftops that can be accessed and put them there where they're not going to be an impediment to food production. Good.
So there's hope for some creativity. That's good.
There's hope for some creativity, and I think that's the key to this is about food production and food security. Mm-hmm. And globally, that's a top priority right now. And I think we really need to rethink about agriculture and think of it in the connotation of exactly that. This is food production and food security. I don't think people really understand what agriculture is, but they sure understand food security.
Yeah, so let's dive into food security because that's a huge part. And we have many different levels of viewpoint of what food security actually means. So can you dive in from what your perspective and your focus of food security is?
Well, food security to me would be that Canada is able to feed itself, number one. Okay. And when I say feed itself, I mean affordable, quality food that's accessible to every single Canadian. Mm-hmm. Now, I think I would have thought during COVID, Canadians would have had a much better understanding about where their food comes from, because it was certainly the first time in my lifetime that I went to the grocery store and there were empty shelves for certain products. Mm-hmm. It kind of happened for a little while, but Canadians quickly got back into their routine. Yeah. But I think over the last year or two, when they've seen food prices skyrocket, Canadians are starting to have a much better understanding of what food security actually is. When we were having record numbers of Canadians accessing food banks and numbers we have never seen before. In Alberta, it's up over 30%. One food bank in Prince Edward Island that I've met with was up 70%. Just unsustainable. They can't meet demand. And these are working families who are accessing food banks. Yeah. So food security is not just growing everything and being able to export it, but ensuring that we are having affordable, nutritious, quality food for Canadians. But again, Canada has the role of ensuring food security globally. And when we see what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, and certainly the Middle East, and maybe if Africa, the world is relying on us, and we have to be there to answer that call.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's nothing more disheartening than seeing that a pound of apples costs more than a bag of chips. And when you're stuck there thinking, I can't afford the apples and the chips will at least pretend that I'm satiated and getting food in my body. Like as someone who might be struggling financially or has to meet the budget, those are hard, heartbreaking decisions that one has to make. And we're almost into that realm of affordability where being able to afford the healthy options that we know are good for us and are going to help advance us mentally, emotionally, and so forth. I can't even imagine the emotional battle that you have with yourself when you're in that grocery line making those decisions.
Yeah, and and it's people that we would never expect would be having these struggles. I was just having this conversation with friends of mine the other day, and they were saying, "Man, like exactly that we're just not eating as much fruit as we used to because it's so expensive." I went to go buy a watermelon, one of my favorite things, $13 for a watermelon. I couldn't believe it, and we're all having to make tough choices. I love to go to our local farmers market or the Saskatoon farm or whatever and buy as much fresh produce as I possibly can. But it is becoming, as much as these businesses are trying to keep it affordable, they have to try and pass on their higher costs. The carbon tax, all of these things are having an impact on food affordability and food security. And Canadians are finally starting to see that there is a connection. When you increase costs on producers and farmers, those costs, increase tax on the farmer who produces the food, the trucker who hauls the food, the processor who manufactures the food, the retailer who sells it, the consumer is the one who's going to be paying. Those companies can't absorb all those costs on their own.
No, and I mean, I've even witnessed it in the sense of marketing, where the Google and the digital services tax is now passing that fee down into the end user who is just trying to put an ad out on the internet to market their business. And so in the end, all of those taxes from the top, they're going straight down to the end user, and it's at the necessity of survival for all of these businesses in the end.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's just one layer over another where it continues to, we're in the midst of a cost of living crisis, and we need to address that. And you only address that by reducing costs on Canadians. And one group has one approach to that, and our conservative team has certainly a different approach to it.
Yeah. Back to the famous line of the common sense approach, right?
That's right.
To get some of that back into reality. And then the hard part too is a lot of that stress and affordability stuff then starts playing into mental health stuff, which is another crisis that we seem to be facing, is our current opioid crisis and that safe supply that, thankfully, where we live, we're not really witnessing it, but in the bigger urban centers, it seems to be rampant and just heartbreaking.
Yeah, this is, an issue that's been a passion of mine for a long time, and, family connection to that. I'm sure everyone has experienced this in one way or another, either through a loved one, a friend, or whatever. But it's just become worse and worse and worse. And myself and my colleague Todd Doherty, who's the member of Parliament for Caribou Prince George, we did a white paper for the party a few years ago. And I will say there's no silver bullet, but what is clear in the folks who we spoke with is this current experiment of safe supply and basically decriminalization is failed. It is not working. It is making things worse. And the fact that you have provincial government in BC and now the city of Toronto and Montreal now wanting to look at decriminalization, and we now know the Liberals are looking at a national decriminalization is mind-boggling. Like I don't understand what it would take for you to realize how bad this is. And you are giving away taxpayer-funded drugs to these addicts. And my NDP and Liberal colleagues will just say, well, harm reduction is saving lives. And it is not. It is prolonging the inevitable. Mm-hmm. These people will die, or many of them will die as a result of an overdose at some point. All you're doing is pushing that down the road. You are not providing treatment and recovery. Mm-hmm. I was at the Calgary Police Rodeo on the weekend and spoke to a number of firefighters, first responders, and they are so frustrated with multiple calls every shift. Mm-hmm. And all they're doing there is is trying to keep these people alive. And they said, I'll see the same person 3 times on a shift. Like this is unbelievable. But what that does is it takes them away from helping other people who actually are in, life or death situations because they're dealing with addicts over and over again. And our focus has to be on treatment and recovery. Take those resources from funding legal drugs, which those people who are suffering with addiction, and many of them are there for different reasons. I'm not saying that they don't have issues and for whatever reason that brought them there, but they are taking those drugs, they are selling them to young kids at the schoolyard, on the playground, at the arenas, taking that money, buying what they really want, which is fentanyl or harder drugs, and then they are grooming the next generation of addicts. This is what diversion is doing, and we know it. The statistics are there. So let's take those resources, stop putting millions of dollars into free drugs, and start putting that money into treatment and recovery. Mm-hmm. Let's bring our loved ones home drug-free as best we can. And I think that's the common sense approach to this. Yeah. Because the crime and chaos that this is bringing to our communities is just unsustainable. Yeah. And we are seeing people leave our cities in droves. And many of these first responders said they just want to leave Canada altogether if this is the direction that they were going to continue to go.
Yeah, I mean, to have to go and revive the same person in the same shift multiple times, you lose your compassion for someone in that situation, even though you know that you should be compassionate. But it totally goes against what all your training went for.
Yeah, and this is the frustration and just hopelessness in their voices and in their faces. You could just see it, and they know what their job is. They want to save lives. This is why they got into that profession, but it's just non-ending. And not only not ending, but when government policy continues to make this a reality, thankfully in Alberta, we have a different approach, and we're seeing the benefits of that with the closure of supervised injection sites and the construction of 11 recovery and treatment centers, which I think is a great step by the province of Alberta. And I hope other provinces follow that lead and see that that is the more sensical approach to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So as citizens, I mean, a lot of Canadians are, like you said, in that hopelessness state. But as citizens, what can we do to try and either start advocating our government a little bit further, or even just supporting our next door neighbor to be able to get through this together rather than feeling like we're all alone through the entire affordability, opioid, and all these other things that just seem to be compounding on us?
Yeah, when you put it that way, you kind of say, like, why am I getting out of bed in the morning? But yeah, there is hope on the horizon. Certainly I think people are starting to wake up to that there are consequences to bad government policy, and we are not alone. Reach out to your neighbor. If you see that they're struggling, offer whatever help you can. I know a lot of us are proud and we don't want to admit when we need some help, but we have to get over that stigma. And certainly, I think the majority of us are suffering or struggling in one way or another. So I think if you open up to your neighbor, they are likely having an issue in another area that maybe you can help. But in all seriousness, we just can't be overly proud here. If you need a hand, there are lots of community organizations who are out there who are willing to help. But certainly one thing I'm proud of is Southern Alberta. We pride ourselves on being there for our neighbors, and we don't say no. And if you need a hand, we'll be there to give you a hand up for sure.
Yeah. And I will say, even I experienced that firsthand in my bobsleigh days way back when I was trying to fundraise to go to the Olympics. And I had families that I knew couldn't really afford to support me, and they did. And that is a testament to the quality of the people when they, I guess, see something that can give them a little bit of hope. So sometimes we have to open the door to provide the opportunity to give hope to them too.
Yeah, you're right. And, certainly if as a world-class athlete like yourself, you're so focused on your training and everything else. And like, I need to fundraise for a sled and equipment and physiotherapy and all these things that I shouldn't have to worry about. I'm busy training. But if we don't know you need that help, then we probably aren't going to step up and help. So sometimes people just need to ask, and you'd be surprised what the answer is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm totally curious. In the House of Commons, do you guys just bicker and never actually answer questions, or are there actual quality debates that happen short of the snippets that we see on the news and everywhere else?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think people, the one time that they tune in is question period. And question period is that 1 hour that's every day, which is certainly a little bit more heated, I guess, or theatrical maybe than everything else. The rest of the day is pretty tame, where you are having debates, and I wouldn't say we agree on very much, but you can find some common ground. But I think a lot of good work gets done at the committee stage, which a lot of people don't pay attention to, but there are a number of committees. I'm the vice chair of the Agri-Food Committee. We work relatively well together to try to come up with some consensus on issues and studies and things that we look at, and a number of committees are like that. So yes, there is some heated exchanges in the House of Commons for sure. I've been a part of them. I can't deny that, because I am there to defend or be the voice of my constituents. And when the current government is trying to shut down our energy sector or hamstring our agriculture, I have to speak up, and I will speak up passionately and loudly when those times arise. But you also have to find people you can work with on all sides to try and accomplish some things. So if you just go in there like a bull in a china shop every single time, you're probably not going to get a lot accomplished. So you do have to find some like-minded folks in other parties who you can work with and try to get some things done. And that's anywhere from an agriculture policy or legislation to, if I've got a constituent who's got an issue with the CRA, I need to try and find people who help me resolve that.
Yeah. Perfect. So there is some normal human conversation that happens too. It's not just the sound bites.
No, you will every now and again. I'll go for a beer with a Liberal or an NDP, and we'll try and hash out some things. But yeah, that's not really seen in the front page of the Toronto Sun or leading off CTV.
Yeah. Well, and it gives people a bit of a image of politics that is obviously, it's exciting and you're able to capture attention, but it's not a healthy definition of what your role is actually doing either. So we all need to investigate a little bit further, maybe watch some of the boring videos as well.
Yeah, it's certainly not as spicy, I guess. But I guess I can compare it a little bit to, as an athlete yourself, you go to a hockey game, you're very competitive, you're hitting each other, you're grinding it out in the corners, but afterwards you'll go for a beer and you'll hash it out. So there's a lot of that too there, where certainly we have to ensure our voice is heard in the House of Commons, but once the horn goes and you're out behind the scenes, you'll have some very collegial relationships and conversations with members of all parties. And I pride myself on being someone who is approachable and a good person, one of integrity, that if you ask me something, I will do it. And I hope that's reciprocated to the other way too.
Absolutely. And integrity is key for the roles that you hold. So thank you for that.
I'll do my best.
I had somebody ask me to ask you, oh, jeepers, it's fairly level-headed. I don't know if you'll be able to answer it, though, so we'll just see. But given Canada's current financial climate, how long do you think that it'll take to recover to even where families within the lower middle class section will have even disposable income again?
Yeah, it's impossible to put a timeline on that. I don't even know when the next election's going to be held. But what I will say is a conservative government under Prime Minister Pierre Poilievre is not going to be a wallflower or overly pragmatic. We know the financial situation we are going to inherit a year from now. We know the cost of living crisis Canadians are facing and how desperate they are to turn things around. So we will do everything we can. The first bill that we have will be to eliminate the actual carbon tax. That will be gone. That is a substantial cost savings to Canadians. But we are also going to embrace the fact that Canada is a resource country. And again, like I said at the beginning, we make what the world needs. Imagine the economic position Canada would be in if we had LNG ports on both coasts, if we had a supply chain that was reliable and dependable, and our agriculture commodities were moving east, west, north, south. That is what we are focused on achieving. We are not going to be ashamed of what we are. We are going to be proud of who we are. A united, strong country that is a resource country. And we're going to start bringing that value added here at home rather than exporting all of our raw materials and then buying them back at a higher price. Perfect. We want to create those jobs, bring that investment to Canada. And I am very confident, as our leader says all the time, we want to bring home powerful paychecks to Canadians. And we do that by not government subsidies, but government developing an atmosphere or a region that we are open for business, that attracts that investment, makes Canadian businesses want to plant their roots here and grow. And right now we've lost billions of dollars in national and foreign investment because we just do not have that open for business mentality here right now. It's the taxes are too high, the regulations are too cumbersome. They are so hyper focused on the environment that they are losing the plot. And you are chasing away companies and industry as a result of that. And we want to reverse that. And I think we can reverse that, I'm not going to say overnight, but just sending that message to industry is going to give them the confidence to come back to Canada or reinvest in Canada and start creating those really strong middle-class jobs here in Canada once again.
Yeah, and you've even touched on, we have lost a lot of international businesses that called Canada home for some of their headquarters and have pulled out and moved back to wherever it is that their headquarters is, or have gone elsewhere to other countries. And that's a massive loss of not only income, just money being generated within there, but jobs as well.
For sure. And, it's not sexy, but Canada's productivity has just fallen through the basement. We are 67th in the world. I would argue we're lucky to be a G7 country anymore, let alone a G20 country. Now, people don't really pay attention to that, but what that means is our productivity in Canada is continuing to decline because we're losing that investment. Their companies and industry are taking their companies and their jobs elsewhere. And as a result, Canada is going to be a have-not country if we continue to go in this direction. And as you said, those middle to lower class Canadians who are looking to move up and get better paying jobs, those jobs just aren't going to be there. We are losing jobs in the private sector. The only area that we're gaining jobs is the public sector, and that is not sustainable. Financially, economically, long term, that's crushing. So we need to reverse that trend. That's something that we can easily do. But secondly, is we want to simplify the tax code. And again, not sexy, but it is so confusing and so convoluted. We want to lower taxes for all Canadians so they could take home more of what they earn. The more that they take home, the more they put back into our economy, the better it is for all Canada.
Yep, absolutely. Because then they're not having to do the old 30% of every single month, saving it away just for tax season when it kicks in. And they're not caught off guard or having to somehow pay off that tax claim with credit line, right? So
that's right.
Yeah, it's all long-term planning rather than in the moment planning. And I think that's vital moving forward. And I mean, if you're a business owner, you understand that. You're not making decisions for tomorrow. You're making decisions for 5-10 years down the line.
Yeah. Yeah, and by the Pierre Poilievre is committed to putting together a tax task force. That's a lot of alliteration there, but it's something that we should have been doing or should have done years ago. Is we've just allowed the bureaucrats to grow the tax code into just this monster. But it's not only reducing taxes for Canadian citizens, but Canadian businesses. They've on April 1st, the Liberal NDP government increased the carbon tax, they increased the excise tax, and they increased the CPP and employment tax. Those are all taxes on business owners. But we have to remember that this Prime Minister called small business owners tax cheats, even though they are the ones. I love it when any government of any political stripe says, we're creating all these jobs. Governments don't create jobs. No. Businesses create jobs. Canadians create jobs. The only jobs that governments create are in the bureaucracy, and those aren't good jobs. Those are jobs that will, cost the taxpayers money. And we've seen the bureaucracy grow by 50% over the last 9 years. And I can tell you in our office, I don't think services have been any worse. So more money, worse outcomes, that's not really a good combination.
Yeah, and a reminder that that's taxpayer paid income for that 50% larger government.
That's right. That's all paid for by the taxpayer. That's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, good changes on plan and in route, hopefully. And, I just want to say, John, I thank you so much for your time and for the effort that you do put in representing our agricultural world around here in the foothills. I mean, that is the life and breath of our region, among the other things, but they're also intertwined. All of our industry needs each other. And what you're doing and your ability to just really speak up in representation of your constituents is very consistent and very appreciated. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the very kind words and the encouragement. It means a lot. It truly is my biggest honor to represent the families and business owners of Foothills. I can't think of a more rewarding experience than what I've had here. And hopefully we'll keep it going for a little while longer. And yeah, certainly for those who are listening, there is hope on the horizon. There is common sense coming. I am truly optimistic of what Canada can be and what we will be under a common sense conservative government that is focused on fiscal responsibility, safe communities, building homes, building infrastructure, and again, bringing home those powerful paychecks for Canadians once again, where I just feel we're ready to get that weight lifted off our shoulders and just be proud again about who we are, no matter where you came from, how long you've been here. It's about being Canadian, about being united, and I know we can do it. And it's just a matter of having the right leadership and the right direction. And great job, Lisa, on your podcast and your role with the Chamber of Commerce as well. It's been a breath of fresh air, and to see you being active out there too, it's been great.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I know that you've got to go and get a knee healed, so we'll let you go.
After all you've gone through as a athlete competing on the world stage, I feel really lame that this is a hockey shinny injury. But
you know what? It's always the injuries happen at the worst time. Most of ours were when we were goofing around playing like dodgeball or something. So it's okay. That's how it goes.
Well, thanks, Liz. I appreciate having me on.
Thank you.